This podcast is sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. By Hyde Park Care Pharmacy. Experience the difference an independent pharmacy can make for you and your loved ones. Hyde Park Care Pharmacy offers personalized care, short wait time, very competitive pricing, easy transfer of your prescription, and much more. And by Molly Maid. During these times of COVID-19, it has never been more important to keep your family safe. With the Healthy Home Cleaning System, Molly Maid London is here to help. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be listening. Welcome back. It's the Vicars Crossing podcast, a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we are back for episode 3 of our 3rd season. And my name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the rector and priest and vicar of Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London.
Indeed. And his partner vicar here is Kevin George. I'm the priest of St. Aidan's Anglican Church. Glad to be with you all today.
And I'm Ian. I make sure that they hit record.
Hey, he's the man. The myth.
Which is,
the legend.
The legend. Which is not untrue, folks, because just moments ago, we started talking and we hadn't hit record. Nope. Thank goodness for you.
Could have done a whole episode and nobody would ever see it. If the Vicars Crossing records an episode and it's not recorded, does anybody hear it?
Ask Bruce Coburn.
Yeah.
So today we have a special guest, although she is not entered into the room yet, but we'll be here shortly. We'll be welcoming in Baroness Hunt of Bethnal Green to the Vicars Crossing. And Kevin's going to introduce her, and we'll bring her in just a few minutes here. But first of all, we want to say thank you and hello to our wonderful sponsors who help us keep this podcast on the air, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, family-owned and operated.
And we want to do a shout out to Carol Basada over there at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, locally owned, locally operated, locally loved. Thanks for your support.
And also to Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London, Ontario today. And many thanks to Tricia Lister, who I incorrectly pronounced it as Listar earlier.
Yeah, all right, we got Lister now. We got it all going good now, man. We're not listing at all now.
We're on a roll. All right. Well, let's just check in for a minute because I wanted to ask Kevin about how he's feeling about his hockey team, because I know he's been chomping at the bit to, I wouldn't say brag at all, but to show some excitement.
Well, it just happens that I wore this hat today. This is the logo of the beloved Montreal Canadiens. This was a hat actually given me by Rob Henderson. It's got number 29 on the back. Oh, here we go. For Ken Dryden, who was one of my favorite players in the past. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. We're headed into the playoffs. So we weren't supposed to be in it. And we weren't supposed to beat the Penguins, and we did. And now we're not supposed to beat Philadelphia. So we'll have to see where that goes. On a happy note, watch the Pepsi commercial during the Stanley Cup playoffs, because someone you know is going to be in that Pepsi commercial.
No, you're kidding.
Really?
Get out.
I am indeed.
Wow.
So
this is going to be good.
Tweeted out pictures of yourself in your gear. What am I doing to get ready for hockey? And they sent me a message saying they're going to use my picture on their next ad for Pepsi. You know that
Right
you know that Lay's Pepsi ad where they're dropping the
Yeah.
you know, and they're all and they're singing this song. It's in that ilk, and one of the bubbles will be yours truly.
Finally,
That's so awesome.
Kevin's in his own bubble. It's about time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Good.
Yeah.
Well, I know a lot of people are excited to see hockey back. I know a lot of Leaf fans are not today, although they were about 6 days ago. They were very happy.
How did Ian take it?
I don't know. Ian, are you okay?
I will be. You know, it happens a lot.
Shit happens. Shit happens.
Yeah.
And the Leafs happen, so get used to it,
yeah.
my young friend.
How were you feeling, Rob, the other night when, I mean, I know you don't like the Leafs as much as I don't like the Leafs, and they were almost out at 3-0 there at game 4, whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty incredible to watch. I mean, that does not happen too often. No. And especially the momentum of the shift from being up 3-0 and then losing, and then being down 3-0, and then winning.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And as a fan, as a hockey fan, I'm not a big Leaf fan, but as a hockey fan, I was a little disappointed that they didn't really show up in that final game. And
I know.
I think Leaf fans agree. I mean, it was a shame on that end. But Liam Foudy, who plays for the London Knights, local guy that we've had a chance to see play, scored his first NHL goal for Columbus. So there was a little bit of a local flavor to that, which was pretty exciting.
Rocking. The other local flavor is Boone Jenner, who's from Dorchester.
Yeah.
And Boone played a big part in this too. So getting to know his mom a little bit through Jesse's journey this year. And
good.
Yeah.
Good. All right. It's time for Ian's favorite part of the Vicars Crossing podcast. We'd like to call this little portion Sickness or Suds.
Glug, glug, glug.
Excuse me. A little tickle.
What is this all about, Rob? Sickness or suds?
In Sickness or Suds, I will give you a word or phrase. It's up to you to try to guess whether it's a sickness or a sud, as in a beer.
Sudsy beer.
Sometimes we call beer suds. Although we're finding a lot of people
don't.
Our guests don't know that that's a word for beer.
We use the word suds. This is not new, I don't think, is it?
Right. It's not. No. So this is our word today. Are you ready, gentlemen?
Ready.
Tell me if this is a sickness or a sud. Our word today is Ritter gut.
Sorry?
Ritter gut.
Ritter gut.
Rittergut. Ritter gut.
Can I call a friend?
Can you use it in a sentence?
Ritter gut. I went out to the pub and got very drunk on a full case of Ritter gut. I'm going to say that it's a beer, a craft beer, a sud. Ritter gut.
It's a sud. Okay.
Ritter
Ian, what do you think? Ritter gut.
Just to be different, I'm gonna say it's a sickness. What it does, no idea. How I came to this conclusion, no clue. But I'm gonna say it's a sickness for.
Yeah. If it was a sickness, reason. One would assume that it would affect the stomach area.
The gut,
right?
Because after a few greasy burgers, you might come up with Ritter gut.
Sure.
Yeah. You never know.
Maybe if you drank too much beer, you get Ritter gut.
We'll have to give this one to the elder vicar. Ritter gut is a beer. It is a German beer.
Ooh.
And it is available at your local LCBO, Kevin.
Really?
So yes, I saw it on their website. Ritter gut.
Ritter gut, and it's German. Is it from a local craft brewery or?
It just says made in Germany.
It's actually a German beer. Okay.
Yeah, it is a German beer.
Oh wow!
And imported, and so we can maybe look for that the next time we're there.
We're gonna have to get some Ritter gut onto the podcast. Meantime, I'll drink tea with the CBC mug.
All righty, and now it's time for your second favorite part of the Vicars Crossing podcast, because this is where we span into Ian's brain and dig a little deep. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, for Ask Ian. Well, Ritter gut on that one.
That's a Ritter gut right there.
Deep.
Now, we've had some really good questions over the last little while, and this one is no exception. This question comes to us today from the east coast of the continent, from a place called Nantucket. A guy there named Patrick would like to know, on what occasion do you lie? Like not lay down, but like tell a lie. On what occasion do you lie? That's a good question, though, isn't it?
It is a good question.
That's a really good question.
And don't lie about it.
See, here's the thing. So, like, I try to live my life as being as honest as possible, because, like, honesty, genuine, you got to, like, be a real person to make connections in the world. Right. Yeah, true. There is times, like, when someone knocks on your door being like, hey, spare some change for blank, blank, and blank. Usually there's a white lie told there, being like, oh, we've already done it, or we're planning on doing it at another place, which is something that's happened recently. But like, I don't think the world would be a really good place if everyone was honest, as honest as they could be. Like, there's obviously like situations where, you know, you probably shouldn't say something, or
like the
plead the
Seinfeld
fifth is a thing.
like the Seinfeld episode where nobody wanted to tell this couple how ugly their baby was. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's socially unacceptable to look at a baby and say to the parents, "Wow, ugly."
It's ugly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is like a good time to lie.
Okay.
But like in I'm trying to think of like other situations where it would be pretty okay to lie. Like, I don't know, but on an everyday occasion, I think being as honest as possible is good.
That's the right solution. I agree.
Mhm.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, I think you've done pretty good. What about Robbie?
Cool.
Let's see where he lies.
Yeah, I was saying what I was thinking about what Ian was saying, and it's really around, for me, I think it's about what I think would be sparing someone's feelings. Like, I wouldn't want to, like the baby thing, obviously,
Yeah.
or the, I've said to my kids who have come in with, certain clothing over their teenage years, "Hey, Dad, you like this shirt? That's a nice shirt."
Mm-hmm.
But that was
Honey-
a lie.
Honey, does my rear end look large in this dress?
That's right. Does that
Yeah.
dress make me look?
Yeah.
So no, but in general, yeah, what I would think would be sparing someone's feelings, I think, is when I would tell a
Yeah.
little white lie and
Yeah.
say, yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah.
What about you, Kevin?
I lie when I'm in the bishop's office. No, I'm kidding. I'm with the two of you. I think most of you know there's very little that I won't say. I'm usually pretty honest and direct. Sometimes that's not the best. But I think I'm with the two of you in the sense that I think those times that I bend the truth are usually to protect people, whether it's their feelings or, sometimes we've been called into protecting people from, brokenness in relationships. And,
Sure.
if you've ever done refugee work, sometimes, you find yourself having to protect.
Do you guys know about Immanuel Kant?
Yeah.
Heard of him. Yep.
You've been reading Kant?
No, I read about this thing, and it says that he posed a question about honesty, and it says, if a known murderer came looking for your friend and asked you, would you tell the murderer where your friend's whereabouts were?
Mhm.
And Kant said yes, because your dealings are not your friends, and obviously your friend's faults don't really apply to you, which I kind of disagree with, because you would want to protect your friend if a known murderer came looking for your friend, right?
Yes.
So,
Right.
hi, this is Editing Ian, just quickly stepping in to correct myself, saying that it wasn't Immanuel Kant who was posed this question, it was actually Plato. Immanuel Kant had this to say about honesty. He said, when trying to do the right thing in a difficult situation, perfect honesty may seem second best next to values like compassion, respect, and justice. To be human, Kant said, is to have the rational power of free choice. To be ethical, he continued, is to respect that power in oneself and others. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Keep listening to the podcast. Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. Bye.
That's
Right.
interesting.
No,
Anyway.
it is a good thought. And it's, when I say I would lie in order to spare someone's feeling, that in itself is a bit of an arrogant statement, because why can't that person not receive the truth? Like, I'm supposed to, that they don't have the capacity to do that. They certainly do.
Yeah.
So it's this, you go back and forth with it, right?
Yeah.
Very
Definitely.
cool.
So, well, it looks like our guest is about to enter into the Vicars Crossing virtual space. So we'll bring her in here and welcome her right now.
Great.
And we're going to let Kevin introduce our special guest from across the pond today. Kevin, would you please?
I would indeed. We're very happy and excited to have with us today Baroness Ruth Hunt of Bethnal Green. She was the chief executive of Stonewall, the United Kingdom's largest charity campaigning to improve equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. In her 14 years with the organization, she worked with more than 700 organizations in the UK and globally, as well as with schools, grassroots campaigners, and senior government ministers, and led high-profile, impactful campaigns. Prior to joining Stonewall, Ruth worked for Universities UK on equalities in higher education and was the president of the Oxford University Student Union. Ruth holds honorary fellowship from Cardiff University and honorary degrees from Keele and Exeter. She was the vice chair of the National Homeless Charity Shelter and is currently a trustee of Engage Britain. And Ruth, this is a first for us. She was appointed as a crossbench peer in the House of Lords and took her seat in October of 2019. And so you're our first Baroness.
I'm very pleased to be with you.
Thanks for coming on here and joining us. And I guess right off the hop, It's Baroness of Bethnal Green. My gosh, that sounds really important. We noted that in an interview with The Guardian earlier, you said, aged only 40 and unequivocally a dyke, finding myself a baroness in the House of Lords is unexpected. It was a big decision to accept, but I see it as my duty. Receiving letters addressed to Baroness Hunt of Bethnal Green does tickle me. For those of us over here on the other side of the pond, who we don't have a House of Lords, we're not familiar with peerages and how they work. Enlighten us and tell us about Bethnal Green, where you are to Baroness.
So it's a very old-fashioned way of doing government, and for those who think that Britain holds the key to democracy, it might have been the case in the 17th century. I think we could do with updating ourselves. So basically, the House of Lords is the second chamber, so it's the scrutinising chamber. So our members of Parliament, MPs, who represent locations, so geographical areas, and are elected based on political party, they are elected and they make decisions. The House of Lords are appointed, and they are a second chamber, and they have a scrutinising role. So MPs decide legislation, the government brings legislation through, and the House of Lords scrutinises that legislation. So it's a check and balance, and is a vital part of democracy. But I think probably everybody in the House of Lords would prefer to see, I don't know everybody, I think the majority of people in the House of Lords would prefer to see a more democratic way of creating a second chamber. But we've got what we've got. And people become peers of the realm based usually on their experience, their expertise in particular areas. There's lots of very, very wise people in their 70s who've had 50 illustrious years as QC. There's always bishops, Church of England bishops sit in the House of Lords, so that's controversial in Britain.
Yeah.
That why should religious leaders be in this scrutinising position?
Yeah.
And there are about 800 of us, but probably 400 active at any one time. And it's all the old buildings you see on the television. But at the moment, we've all moved over to Microsoft Teams and Zoom. So there's lots.
I bet.
Wow.
There's lots of that going on there.
It sounds a little bit like, it sounds basically because we have the British parliamentary system here, but we have a Senate instead of a House of Lords. And I was going to ask you about the age thing, because here often, it's changed a little bit in recent years, but not much. I think of you at that age, at the age you are, you're, one of our peers. Well, not Ian's. Ian's so young he doesn't know us, but to be in the House of Lords, or to sort of bring it over here, if you were appointed to the Senate at such a young age, must really have been something. You must stand out a little in terms of your age.
I stand out because of my age, because of my gender as well. It's quite it's certainly a male majority.
Is it?
Lords, certainly, yeah. And yes, my age and my identity and my area of expertise. I'm not a lawyer. There's an awful lot of lawyers in
bet.
And lots of ex-civil servants, and lots of people who've kind of done, and lots of ex-politicians, lots of MPs kind of end up there. So I'm definitely the kind of young, scrappy and hungry kid on the benches, and that's a little bit scary, really. So it's a bit scary.
So tell me, is it true that the previous speaker becomes a member of the House of Lords?
Not guaranteed. That's very controversial. So John Bercow.
That's his way. Order. We're very
John Bercow, who was the speaker and used his intricate knowledge of Parliament to really challenge Brexit, is conspicuously absent from the list of new peerages. Whereas Ian Botham, who's a cricketer in Britain, but was very, very pro-Brexit, has got a place in the House of Lords. So,
interesting.
So it's all very corrupt. But I was nominated by Theresa May, and so she put me forward because so prime ministers can nominate, and I guess for my work at Stonewall and the work in the church, and so there's kind of it's funny ways there, and you choose your title.
Okay, so you chose Bethnal Green.
Yeah, if you're the first person of your name, you don't have a title. But there's another Baron Hunt, so I am Baroness Hunt of, and you choose your room.
So why Bethnal Green? Tell us about Bethnal Green.
So I'm Welsh, but I don't live in Wales anymore. So you
Right.
tend to choose somewhere where you have connections with your community. And
Mhm.
Bethnal Green is where I live now, and it's a inner city-ish area of East London. And
Mhm.
historically, it's been always the place where migrants go, where new populations come and go. It's a it was heavily bombed during the Second World War. So it's a hugely diverse, multicultural part of London with massive pockets of deprivation and increased gentrification. So I go to church here, I swim here, I pray here, I live here, volunteer at the local food bank here, all that kind of stuff. So Bethnal Greens is my people, really. And I think my mother would have preferred a good Welsh place, but that would have been unfair on the Welsh because I'm not there. So
Right.
it would have been unhelpful.
Do you
Wonderful.
speak Welsh?
Oh, not much. I learned as a kid to be polite to my grandparents, but I doubt I mean, I probably remember enough for Canada, so Polydar and Satyathu and Dayawn and all, so not enough, I'm afraid.
Ian's quite in love with Wales.
Yeah, I went there when I was 15, and it's gorgeous. It's so pretty.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's great.
Where did you
That's
go?
fascinating.
How did you end up there?
So my grandparents came from Wales to Canada, and they were like, "We're gonna take you back," and they have a little cottage outside of Cardiff, and it's gorgeous.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
near a cliff, and it's so pretty.
So I grew up in Cardiff, so Porthcawl and Barry Island and all that, that's my stomping ground. So
Wow.
Good for
Wonderful.
you. Good for you. Well, so interesting, and we're so glad to have you here with that background. But also want to talk to you about your work and your book coming up in just a little bit as well. You mentioned Stonewall, and I wanted to ask you about that and have our listeners hear a little bit about that. You were very with a very influential group, Stonewall LGBTQ organization, for 14 years, and also worked as executive director. And by all accounts, your tenure there was transformative, I'm sure. And you did take some heat for broadening the work of Stonewall to include advocating for transgender folk. In an interview with The Guardian, you described the lack of trans inclusion in Stonewall's advocacy as baffling, saying, "The aggression shown toward trans people is one micro step away from aggression shown to butch dykes or camp men. It's all part of the same hatred. People do not differentiate." So can you tell our listeners a little bit about Stonewall and what it is, its work, and share maybe a little bit about that transformation that you saw during your time there?
for sure. And so Stonewall was set up in 1989 by a guy called Ian McKellen, who your listeners might be familiar with, Gandalf.
Gandalf, yeah.
Or
You shall not pass.
that's Caesar. So him and Michael Cashman, Lisa Power, a group of people got together to set up a highly professional lobbying organisation, because at that time a piece of legislation was introduced in the UK called Section 28, and that piece of legislation prevented the promotion of homosexuality in schools. So it was a bit like what's happening in Russia now, a hugely negative piece of legislation. So Stonewall was set up and advocated very strongly and professionally for rights for lesbian and gay people, and worked through a catalogue of legal changes, the like of which have really only matched in Ireland and Canada, actually. The kind of not just the kind of simple stuff, but the intricate stuff like lesbian fertility rights and all those kind of tricky things. And trans issues had always been dealt with separately, and I think that it became very clear to me that was a situation that was untenable. Stonewall had significant resources compared to trans lobbyists and the trans advocates. And so when I became CEO, exec director, I undertook a process of consultation to make that happen, bring trans in. And you described as getting some heat for that, which is an understatement that is equivalent to British coy remark. It's been extraordinary, and the backlash, particularly from some quarters, some women who identify as lesbian, was incredibly difficult to manage. And all the research says that the vast majority of the population is very at ease with trans people. There's lots of misunderstanding. There's lots of things that need to be known. But this became an acutely divisive issue and remains an acutely divisive issue in the UK. And do I think that was down to me in Stonewall? No, I don't. I'm not. My sense of personal responsibility is not quite so defined. But it did so happen that we we entered into this fray at a moment when there was increased polarization across the globe and an increased reliance on culture wars as a way of holding binary positions, and of course the advent of social media that has created what can only be described as a kind of adolescent debating chamber, where everybody is reduced to its lowest common denominator and utterly fixed in one's position that can be expressed in 240 characters. So all that creates, so I am hugely pleased that Stonewall now thinks about trans issues and works on trans issues, but it is a cause of ongoing distress. The extent of discrimination and prejudice demonstrated toward trans people in British press and media and communities at the moment it's certainly something of deep concern.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the climate here, and you know, I just feel like a lot of it here in North America, certainly here in Canada anyway, has been, you know, the original sort of wall fell. Oh, look at that! She came into the light.
Sorry, I didn't
and that, you know, the sort of original work or battle was to, you know, open up rights to lesbians and gays, bisexual people. The trans stuff has become more prevalent of late, and I just think here it seemed, and again, I'd need to get someone from the Canadian context on, but I'm sure it had the same sort of politics, but it doesn't, at least from what I've heard, had the same vitriol that I've read about in terms of what you went through at Stonewall. I mean, it really sounds as though it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal and remains a big deal. And the fact that didn't happen in Canada or Ireland. So Ireland is Ireland has much more progressive legislation around trans issues than England, Scotland, and Wales does. So it was a certain moment in time, and the vitriol. It was heightened by the fact that we had a government at the time who was not forthright in its position. So they flip-flopped for quite a long time and continue to flip-flop on what they think. Whereas a lot of legislation for lesbian and gay people in the UK was passed under the time of Tony Blair and David Cameron. And both of them were just wholly committed and just shot it all through.
Right.
Theresa May was, but Theresa May, of course, had Brexit to contend with.
Yes.
So, you know, Brexit is a really, really deeply problematic distraction in Britain before a significant global pandemic to contend with. I mean, you know, we're in a bit of a mess as a nation.
Yeah. Yes. And again, talking about understatements.
Yeah, talking about understatements. A few things.
We maintain a narrative of stoic determination, but I think everybody we're struggling a bit at the moment.
Brexit just seemed to, again, from, you know, we're across the pond, but just watching that unfold was just incredible. I mean, it does appear as though, I mean, do you get a sense from, you know, now that it's sort of, you know, moved ahead, they've done the thing, but, you know, all the work that had been done over the years to advance a European sort of mentality and particularly as that relates to immigration and sort of a multiculturalism, do you sense that things are a little different? I mean, is there a...
Yeah, I mean, Little Britain is pervasive right now. And I mean, I'm not an expert on these things, but I think Britain has a risk of always maintaining its belief in its imperial status.
Mm-hmm.
But we've invented aeroplanes now. We're not so reliant on the Navy. Do you know what I mean? Like,
That's right.
Yes, that's right.
That helps. That helps. Well, Ruth, one of the things we wanted to check in with you about, and that the one way you came to us was through the work of your book, and I know Ian had a question about that, so I'll turn it over to Ian.
Yes, to bring it back, there's the book. Look at that book, The Book of Queer Prophets. What a great title. So Kevin actually has been going on and on about this book. He's probably mentioned it in the past like 3 or 4 podcasts now. And in the book, you write, Queer Prophets is a plea not just for understanding, but also for empathy. We are asking you to let go of what you think you know about LGBTQ plus people and faith and be open to hearing our stories. We might just have something to say that's integral to God's plan rather than a supposed anathema to it. Now, can you tell us more about this project and were there any surprises in the essays that you collected and just, tell us about the book.
Sure. So when I announced my resignation from Stonewall, I got a lot of, will you write the book on the history of gay rights? And I was like, I can't imagine anything more dull. And instead, what I was really, when I reflected on my time, I was really disappointed at how little progress I'd made in terms of building bridges between LGBT communities and faith communities. I hadn't moved it as far as I'd have liked. I was also really aware that the voices of real people got lost. You know, so often discussions in faith communities can very quickly either exist on a deeply personal plane of rejection, so there's power there, you are not welcome here, or on the, well, my Greek translation of Leviticus says this, what does your Greek translation say? So you either need like a PhD in Greek philosophy, interpretation of what it means to be an angel, or you're deeply, deeply vulnerable because you're going to be rejected. And nowhere in that is there a safe expression of those stories. So I wanted to give a platform to a wide range of LGBT people, you know, people with different stories. I didn't have an agenda. I didn't want to only tell a particular type of story. And I think what I was struck by from all the accounts is there's a huge amount of pain in there. And I think that's inevitable. But my aspiration that there would be something of worth to be said about Christianity that's not being said, that is almost nothing to do with LGBT. So people of faith who are LGBT have come to an analysis of faith because of that experience, but it's not their gay hot take. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, they had something to say about community, about compassion, about the power of values that is of importance to everyone. And it really, that's why we decided on the title Queer Prophets, because I think prophets have something to say and often struggle to be heard. And there's something very important about those stories in their duality as much as anything else that is, yes, important to LGBT inclusion, but also important to what it means to be Christian, I think.
And that prophetic voice is important to, again, push back on some of the narratives, right? That was prophetic voice to speak up against power and things like that, and to have that voice heard.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I've read it. The essays are incredible. I want to just affirm what you just said, which is one of the things I do when I read these for the podcast is I pop out a bunch of quotes and post them over the weeks ahead. You've seen some of that, Ruth, I'm sure. What was heartening to me was, and again, it's like, you know, hearing people say people who happen to be gay or lesbian, for instance, saying to me, well, I'm more than a gay person or a lesbian. I'm a Christian walking. This is their identity as a Christian shouldn't have to have a tag in front of it about being. And so what was really heartening was the prophetic, just what you're saying, the prophetic words that are in here. That I pulled out and posted on my Facebook page, that if I hadn't posted the cover with it, they wouldn't have associated it with a collection of essays by people in the LGBTQ community. They would have just said, oh, well, there's a prophetic word from a Christian, which is beautiful. That's where we should be.
And I think there's something also about the fact that LGBT people have to establish quite an adult relationship with God. There's nothing habitual about an ongoing relationship with God when you're LGBT. You know, at every moment you have to say, okay, I have to come to this in my own terms now. I mean, you might be lucky that you've got a faith leader who is on that journey with you, but you know, my brothers, we were brought up Catholic. He might go to church sometimes, he might not. He might occasionally give a thought to the Holy Trinity, but you know, probably only when he's baptizing his kids. Do you know what I mean? Like he doesn't really engage with the deep philosophical, spiritual questions. And LGBT people do. And when they come through that process, what they have to say is therefore quite profound.
That's right.
And that's why it breaks my heart that there's a kind of do not enter sign,
right?
Which feels to me such, you know, neither right nor fair nor Christian, and so at odds with what Christ was saying. It just seems utterly baffling to me that anybody who truly believes in God and the work of Christ and living with Christ in your heart would kind of take any steps to go, yeah, but not you.
Right. It is contrary to the narrative. It doesn't hold water. So that sort of leads to the next question, I guess, which is really around your own relationship with the church. You are a professed Roman Catholic. You say that we here on the podcast, we talk about faith in the public square. And I mean, my gosh, going through those 14 years, five as executive director at Stonewall, you couldn't have a more public profile. I mean, you not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe. Your work speaks for itself. It was surprising, as you've noted it in some places, for some to hear that you were a Roman Catholic. They sort of raised an eyebrow about that. So having been encountered people's surprise around that and so on, you write in the book, you say that people find it hard to reconcile the two truths, that you're a campaigner, an advocate, and a Roman Catholic. And you say that people often query how God fits into that fact that you've been made a peer in the House of Lords because you are a lesbian, an activist, and a campaigner, and the work that you've done. Can you talk with us a little bit about what that's been like in terms of, or how you responded then, or perhaps now, that business of, again, it's pulling out your sexual identity and assuming that you would have a faith, whether it's Roman Catholic or anything else, being shocking or surprising. I also know you've encountered in the work that you've done a lot of people in the Muslim community, for instance, who are faithful Muslims and are gays and lesbians. So I just wonder if you can share a little bit more about that experience of people being surprised that you can be such an outspoken advocate for gay rights, and be a faithful whatever, but in your case, Roman Catholic.
Yeah, and I think probably for the first 10 years of my career at Stonewall, I kept them quite separate. I was more in the closet about my faith, and I think probably if you'd asked me in my early 30s, I'd have said, well, my faith is private, it's personal, and that was probably reflected in the fact that I didn't really have a settled church community. I was quite peripatetic. I would go to different churches and slip in the back and do my thing, and then, you know, never stay for tea and never kind of get involved in any of the nonsense. And it's when I became, I'd let it slip in an interview when I was a junior member of staff that I was Catholic, and nobody cares. But as soon as I became CEO, the headline in a national newspaper was, "Practicing Catholic becomes CEO of Stonewall."
Wow.
And it was a lot, you know, it was a lot because my first thought was, I'm not Catholic enough to receive that title in a newspaper. You know, I don't know the Greek translation of Leviticus. And, you know, and for me, you know, I'm not in any way naive about the international political controversy surrounding the Roman Catholic Church. You know, it's not like I can go, yeah, Pope Francis, he's got that women's thing down. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do get it. And suddenly I'm kind of like, am I about to become an apologist for the Vatican?
Yeah.
And actually, I had to really think about, well, what is my faith about? And why is it Catholic and not this? And a little bit of that is habit. Some of it is aesthetic, because I really like, you know, the Catholic Mass. That's my way of connecting with God. I do believe in transubstantiation. I do believe, you know, so kind of I checked it all in my head. And then sort of went, well, actually, my faith does shape my attitude to leadership. It does shape my values. It does shape the decisions I've made in my careers. It does shape my philosophy, which is, you know, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. But similarly, the Lord's Prayer asks me to forgive those who've sinned against us. And that's always been, and it's so simple, but such a profound thing. It's such a big ask. It's such a big ask to ask me to forgive those who trespassed against me. Far bigger than asking God to forgive me for my trespasses, because God forgives. Asking me to forgive, and so that's shaped my entire approach to life. You know, okay, I forgive you. You know, I forgive what's happening here. I see what's happening here. Let me try and build bridges, not walls. So I made the difficult decision, I think, when I became ED, to just be out about it and find my voice and sort. And in my we do something. It's called a maiden speech when you do your first speech. It's called giving your maiden. And when I gave my maiden in the House of Lords, I acknowledged that I believed in God, and it's unusual, and I knew it was unusual. And in the House of Lords, it's all filmed and it's all. But there's a moment where they turn all the cameras off so that the peers can pray. The peers, regardless of their faith, turn, kneel on the benches and pray. And it's huge. It's a hugely profound moment. So I think people are, LGBT people were angry that I could seem to belong to an institution that was so damaging. Certainly lots of people thought that it was an indication that I was mentally unwell and not fit to serve. So that was fun. But I think a lot of people realised that that trying to divide parts of ourself away from each other is a hiding to nothing. Privacy is one thing, secrets are toxic. And for particularly Muslim LGBT people I speak to, trying to suppress their faith or discard it is heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of go, I know I'm LGBT, but now I have to lose this part of me, this faith, that's where your mental health issues come from. You know,
Right.
that you know, when you see the higher rate of suicidal ideation amongst LGBT youth, and you see the prolific mental health issues, if you say not only are you gay, but you're not allowed to be part of this community anymore, there's your mental health right there. Now, of course, lots of people are part of it, but for those who are, that loss, that grief is utterly acute. So what I wanted to demonstrate is that it's possible to have both.
Well, you've done that well. Part of what comes to my mind is in our own context, which is not too different. I think I picked up somewhere that you're attending something called St. Matthew's in Bethnal Green.
Yeah.
So, and that's an Anglo-Catholic church. So, in our own reality, the Baptismal Covenant, the Church of England, the Anglican Church of Canada, not too dissimilar, but the fundamental promises we make as followers on the way of Jesus are so critical, right? To seek and serve Christ in all persons, to love neighbor as self, to strive for peace and unity among all people, to respect the dignity of every human being. Like, those are foundational things. And I'd want to think that if I needed somebody to campaign on my behalf, to advocate on my behalf, that's the sort of person I want. And so, I mean, I think the more I've learned about you and read and listened to, the more it's very clear to me that those foundational scriptural and faith-filled doctrines that you've learned in your younger life are what shape who you are. It's incredible. I mean, that's what will produce strong leadership if we're prepared to actually engage that conversation. Can it be surprising? Well, yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes, in order to do the work of Jesus, we hang out in places that might seem unexpected for some, but that's where we're called to be.
Absolutely. And it felt I was absolutely doing that work in Stonewall, and it's the work I'll do in the House of Lords, and I've never felt it to be incongruent. The only moments I felt it was incongruent is when I was in a different place and campaigning and receiving a lot of opposition to those campaigns from people of faith. But what I realized is the people I fell out with were faith leaders. I never fell out with God. You know?
Right.
Yeah. And fundamental principles were not ever questioned.
Right. And did you ever get any pushback from the church at all, or?
Yeah, plenty.
Yeah.
Plenty. Yeah. Because, but I think that and that of course got confusing for a while, particularly when I was 25, 26. You know, kind of working my way out. And then this very clear epiphany that noise had nothing to do with God.
Right.
You know, no more relevant than Twitter. You know,
That's right.
Just it.
Yeah.
So,
It's just that. Yeah. Blah blah. Exactly.
Thanks for your guidance, but actually,
I'll take that under advisement.
Ruth, you've spoken how moved you were with Pope Francis's words in speaking to a church abuse victim by the name of Juan Carlos Cruz. It appeared that the Pope, in your words, confirmed what many Catholics already know to be true. God made us just as we should be. There are no mistakes. You go on to write that the church accepts that LGBTQ people exist, but I want us to get to a point where our love is recognized as being as valid as any other. While we have a way of celebrating our love through civil partnerships and same-sex marriage, we also need to keep working to allow LGBTQ people of faith to marry in the church and declare their love in the eyes of God. And in the diocese that Kevin and I serve here in London, Ontario, as vicars, as priests,
that's right.
We just recently have been given permission to perform weddings of same-sex partners. So I'm wondering what's happening in your neck of the woods in the UK, Church of England, other denominations, and is there hope perhaps that Rome will ever get to a place where LGBTQ people of faith will be permitted to marry in the church?
Well, I think Rome is I think that there's different levels of pace. So I think if we think of Rome on a kind of millennial pace basis, in another half a millennial we might have women vicars in the church. So possibly in another millennial we might have, you know. So Rome moves slowly. Although I have always quipped that the Vatican is in the best position to have a strong LGBT staff network, and I'm sure that their
Yeah.
own staff could do some advocacy. I mean, it is a mess of contradiction over in that.
Yeah.
In terms of British institutions and same-sex marriage, we had some funny shenanigans around law that means that religious premises can, if they want to, conduct same-sex marriages if they have permission. And the Methodists have just about got there. But Church in Scotland are talking about it. Church in Wales are talking about it. Church of England are definitely not talking about it.
Wow.
So Church of England insisted on a piece of legislation that we call the quadlock. And the quadlock means that they cannot commit same-sex marriages unless they go back to Parliament and undo the quadlock.
So as a matter of legislation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, okay.
And this might be too geeky, but bear with me.
That's all right. We love to geek out. So
okay, so in 2004, civil partnerships were introduced in Britain, and 2014, marriage was introduced. And in 2004, the Church of England said, no, down with civil partnerships, we don't like it. But then got themselves into a place where same-sex couples who are vicars and priests, etc., could have a civil partnership as long as they promise not to have sex. Which means that the biggest advocates of civil partnership now are the Church of England. So because they won't have marriage, but they really want civil partnership as long as you don't do anything and enjoy yourself while you do it. The Church of England love civil partnerships, but not marriage. So they've got themselves in this ever so tricky mess. And of course, it's the only time they ever talk about LGBT issues. So every time the Church of England issues another statement about a sexless civil partnership, the whole of the LGBT community groans with disbelief. So the Church of England is struggling. I think Scotland and Wales will get there. Northern Ireland won't get there for a long time. They've slightly had same-sex marriage thrust upon them.
Yeah.
Well, we saw a similar thing here, but no, I mean, what we reflected upon, and we're just, as I say, fortunate that our bishop in this diocese has decided to move on. We had a national church vote a year ago in July, and it failed by 2 votes. I mean, 80% of the people on the floor were in favor, but it's the House of Bishops, the House of Clergy, House of Laity, and it failed in the House of Bishops by two votes. And what's happened is successively across the country now, bishops individually have said, we're done waiting. And the thing that's for us, like me and Rob here as clergy in the Anglican Church of Canada, the Church of England here, it's like our entire adult life, this has been an argument. It's exhausting. And I can't imagine how exhausting it is for anybody who's gay or lesbian or trans. Like it has worn me out that we keep arguing about this. And so when the ship went down last July and they didn't vote in favor, we just up and held a service here at St. Aidan's. Everybody put on their rainbow colors and we loaded the place and had the national news in and said, we're done talking about this because it's time to move on. I wonder, is there a sense there as well? Like, I mean, one of the things that we sensed here is that, here we were to church, instead of leading in terms of social change, we were chasing it, responding to it, even worse, reacting to it at times. And I just feel that one of the new spirits we're seeing among our House of Bishops, which is becoming increasingly more diverse and progressive, is we're trying to find ways now to get out ahead and lead change instead of respond to a culture which has left us behind.
And I'm not sure Britain's clergy is ready for that level of independence.
Interesting.
So they really worry about what their bishops, they worry about what the bishops have to say. The bishops worry about what the archbishop has to say, and people can lose their licenses. So same-sex couples who are priests have married and have lost their license to practice, so have been unable to get work. So the punitive responses are severe. Wow. But the narrative is just wait, be patient, not yet. And I'm not sure. I think, do you know what I think what might have changed the dynamics is COVID. Right. Because the instructions from on high was to keep churches closed, right, which felt such the moment when people most needed spiritual support, the moment we closed the buildings. Yeah. But also lots of people started conducting services from their kitchen tables. So almost a feminization of Mass happened. There was something interesting about the homeliness of Mass. Right. which I think has led more people to do more independent things. So, of course, what happens is there's lots of secret blessings. There's all that kind of stuff. But the Church of England here, blesses the harvest and blesses the gerbils and blesses the cows, but won't bless them.
Yeah, well,
the golf clubs.
it sounds like there's like a 20-year delay across the pond, like, because that's what you're describing is what we've all lived through here.
Yeah.
And we blessed everything under the sun. And I was told I couldn't bless a civil or a gay union or whatever. So we went through all of that here. I mean, and it got to the point where, like you say, it was like, oh, be patient. And I'm just grateful for the number of LGBTQ2S people who have stuck with us, because I'm not sure I could have done it. I mean, like I said, I'm exhausted having 40 years. What am I can remember back to 5 or 6, but I'm almost 50. But by the time I was a teenager and involved in church on a broader level, this was a conversation. And we just got to a place where everybody threw their hands up in the air and said, ugh, enough. We're accepting people, so we're done.
And I think part of the problem in Britain is that we're slipping quite rapidly to the right.
Yes.
So greater conservatism, greater conventional, greater doing what you're told.
Not big on combs, though. Apparently, combs are not big over there.
As in hairbrushes.
As a hairbrush, yeah. Or not for Boris. I wasn't thinking of you. No, you look great. Don't worry about you. I was just thinking Boris hasn't seen a comb.
No, and he ruffles his hair up before he goes on stage. I mean, it's just.
I always think it's awful windy because every time he shows up at Parliament, it's a mess out there. Ruth, I can't let you go without asking you to tell us about deeds and words, and then after that, Kevin's going to give away a book.
Oh, cool!
Some free stuff. So, deeds plus words.
Deeds and Words is a company I run with my partner. So me and Caroline met doing work at Stonewall, and we now work with slightly weird, what you'd call public sector organisations. So to help them really create good inclusive cultures. So we do a lot of work with the NHS, with Bank of England, with things like that. So we help people have difficult, tricky conversations and build bridges, not walls, basically. That's kind of what we do.
Good for you.
And we started working together pre-lockdown. I think had we known this was happening, possibly working everything together in our small 2-bedroom flat. Is a brave move.
Yes.
Caroline doesn't believe in God, but is very supportive of me and lets me do my thing.
Well, that's wonderful. A question on that, you're talking about organizations. I did see somewhere too that you mentioned it. You made some comments about the difficulty for people in talking about different sectors in the sporting sector, for instance, like rugby and football.
Yeah.
Can you say a word about that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, at Stonewall, it got slightly overshadowed by the trans backlash, but we ran a massive campaign called Rainbow Laces, and we do a huge amount of work with what's known the Premier League. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
That? Yeah.
We watch it.
Yeah, so with the Premier League, so every year the Premier League teams don the rainbow laces and they talk about how they're going to be more inclusive. So we do Stonewall do lots of work with rugby, football, cricket, and it's still an area that is stubbornly resistant to people coming out internationally. And my theory is that it's a lot of pressure on kids who've got a very narrow window of professional brilliance. You know, if you've got 3 years to play for Man United, like being the poster boy for gay footballers is pretty tough. I think there's a bit of that going on as well. I don't think it's as much to do with homophobia anymore. I think there's a lot of that going on.
Okay. Kevin, I got to get you to hold up the book there again.
Yeah. We'll get
do you have it?
I do. This is the very copy we're going to give away.
That's the one there. So what do folks have to do to win a copy of the book of Queer Prophets?
Before I do that, I should say we gave away 3 copies of Kevin Macon's book, Why Would Anyone Go to Church? We had 2 hard copies from the publisher, and then he sent me a audio file for that. So Janet Shaw and Joe Sales and Kathy Garbutt,
Yep.
Are those 3 winners. So congratulations to you guys for answering the question right and entering to win. You can enter to win this fantastic compilation of 24, I think.
I think so. You've got it, 24.
24, yes, on front. 24 writers on sexuality and religion. People in here like John Bell, Padraig O'Tama, Ruth Hunt, and a whole bunch more. Just
Jeanette Winterson for your women.
What's that?
Jeanette Winterson.
Oh, yeah.
She's pretty cool.
These are incredible. And as we said when we talked about it earlier, what's really good about this book is it is prophetic. It's more than just, if you're picking it up because you think you need to read something specifically about LGBTQ stuff, you're going to be overwhelmingly pleased that you're going to get that and a whole lot more, because this is a book of prophecy. So I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for having you on here. If you want to win this copy, you can tweet, Facebook message, email us at vicarscrossing@gmail.com and tell us where, she said it earlier in the podcast, where in the United Kingdom did Ruth grow up. So if you shoot us that answer, and I will enter your name to win this book, and we'll announce it on the weekend over Twitter. So it's a great book. You want to win it.
All right. Ruth, we can't thank you enough for spending the time and more time in your very hot flat over there, spending the time with us and sharing your perspective. Thank you for your work. And hey, we wish you well. We hope we can chat again down the road sometime.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Hey, before we sign off, Rob, can I just say a word that in a couple days we're going to sit down with Richard Beck, who's written this great book called Trains, Jesus, and Murder, The Gospel According to Johnny Cash. And this is another one of his incredible books, Stranger God, Meeting Jesus in Disguise. He is an incredible guy. Look him up online. He doesn't like social media, so he doesn't do Twitter or Facebook. But you'll find that he keeps up an incredible blog and writes incredible stuff. We're going to talk to him on Thursday. It should be up on Friday or Saturday. We'd encourage you to look at that. And a little later in the month, former advisor to Barack Obama, Michael Weir, will be joining us to talk about his new book, just released 2 weeks ago, Compassion and Conviction, instead of or. And he's actually recently been talking to the religious and spiritual advisor for Joe Biden on his podcast this week, which is also quite interesting. So look for those things coming up.
All right, that and so much more. And again, I want to thank our sponsors on the Vicars Crossing podcast, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London, Middlesex, both family owned and operated. Big hi to Dave and the gang there, and our thanks for their support. And also, go ahead. Yep.
I was going to say, so we'll also shout out our thanks to Carol Bacedo over at Hyde Park Care Pharmacy.
And Tricia Lister at Molly Maid, London, Ontario.
So Ruth, we've got a couple new sponsors, and Catherine Ann, my wife, said that she figures the way this works is we got Molly Maid to clean up your place for COVID and make sure you don't get sick. If you do get sick, we have Hyde Park Care Pharmacy, which will look after making sure you got your medications. If that doesn't work, we have the funeral home. So,
the last rites.
Yeah, and there's a couple of vicars kicking around. So it's a full service outfit.
Yeah.
That's right. Ruth, thanks so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
God bless for being here. Again, my name is Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's.
I'm Kevin George from St. Aidan's Church.
My name is Ian.
And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways
before you cross that street.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!